All right. Evening, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening for another one of our Tastinars, which we've been looking forward to for the last couple of weeks. We obviously got David and Nadia all the way in the Swartland. Who are going to join us and take us through this evening. Under normal circumstances, would have had them up in Johannesburg, which everyone's aware of the limitations we're all experiencing at the moment. And the rumors are that there's going to be some light at the end of the tunnel in the next few days. Nothing's happened yet, but hopefully that's going to be soon. And in the meantime, that gives us an opportunity to do it in another format. And in terms of what we've done previously, I think it's worked really, really well, where this sort of environment, although not very personal, does give an opportunity to sort of give a bit more information and go a bit more in depth into some of these special vineyards, and then also learning a bit more about the people behind the bottle, as opposed to them maybe pouring it at a table and just clinking glasses. Here we can get a bit more information. So we're looking forward to it. Sorry we were a few minutes late, not as late as Uncle Cyril usually is with his addresses, so I think we can be forgiven. And we're looking forward to the release of the 219s, which we'll have up in Johannesburg as soon as we're allowed to get them up here. We actually officially launched the wines today, so I'm sure all of you would have got the email. And then, just a big welcome to David and Nadia. How are you guys doing?
Hi, I think we're fine. We had some rain, so we are happy. And looking forward to spending some visual time with all the guests. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks for each and everyone to join, to take the time out. We really appreciate it. And would have loved to be up in Johannesburg at the moment, but also happy to be down here. So thanks for the opportunity.
No, cool. Well, thanks for your time. As I say, we're just going to do it in a similar format. As I say, probably not too much repetition required in terms of how we do it. So we try and keep it to an hour. And please, obviously, encourage everyone to use the chat functionality. Always nice to see what everyone's drinking tonight. And if there's any questions, just pop them through on the chat and I'll just negotiate them. If they're not too personal or too controversial, I'll make sure that I propose them to the two guests. And then obviously I've got a few myself, which will hopefully, as I say, just get a bit more information out of David and Nadia. So you've got a slideshow, which, as I say, it's meant to be nice and informal, but hopefully as informative as possible. And then, David and Nadia, you guys can probably just take it away, and then I'll interrupt at the right times, hopefully, to ask relevant questions. And then just nice to start with sort of an overview, maybe where it all started. I've never heard the story about how the two of you met, actually. I think that might be interesting. Who does the most work? I don't know. We need to know these things. So I'll let you take it away and let's see how we go.
Thanks, Derek. I think just to confirm the fact, Nadia's actually doing the most of the work. I'm the one creating and delegating work.
We all actually knew that. I didn't want to tell you.
Yeah, we need both. I'm the dreamer and she's the realistic part of it. I think thanks once again for the opportunity. To keep it brief, I would like to go and take it back as far as 1757, which is when the very first Saudi came from Germany working for the Dutch when they came into the Cape. And he got granted on a long 99-year lease a farm in the Swartland. And so our family has been around for a couple of years. And although I didn't grow up on a farm nor in an agricultural context, it was actually playing rugby or the dream to play professional rugby that took me to Stellenbosch. And my dad said that at least I need to study something. And I went to study viticulture and wine. And it's actually from studying 4 years with Nadia, and she specialized in viticulture and soil science, that got us together basically towards the end of our final year. So it took me four years to open my eyes. But eventually I did, because I was pretty much married to rugby. In 2008 I got my first job. Quickly, from my perspective, It took me a month to work permanently for someone else before I realized I'm not cut out to work permanently for anyone. And 2009 we got married. 2010 we started making our first wine, actually at that stage without permission because I was still employed. Nadia basically worked for an environmental company up to the end of 2015 before she resigned. But basically 2010 I joined Lemberg in Tilburg, and they allowed us to make our own wine. So we grew that for 3 vintages, and then I resigned. We moved back to the Swartland with a dog and a 2-month-old baby, and we got involved with this farm that's on your screen at the moment, which is Paardenbosch. It's a beautiful farm that we lease long-term in the valley, which is called Siebertskloof. It's mostly Chenin and Pinotage right up in the mountain, and then some old vine Semillon. So that's beautiful posing photos. It's actually more, it should have been just Nadia in the photo. But this farm is special for us because obviously for great landlords and owners that allows us to operate in the, and at least the farm long term. And we also restored the old cellar, and that comes from 1795. So it's a beautiful facility and a platform from where we work. And this farm concludes about 70% of the vineyards we work with. That's a beautiful aerial.
That lease that you're talking about, so obviously, yeah, you lease it. How long, I mean, how long term is that lease if you're investing into the cellar and things like that? Is that sort of, how have you gone about that?
So the easier part of it is just 10 years, and which is where we are at the moment. But with that, we're also in discussion with, because they've got 2 owners that owns the farm. We're also in discussion with them to buy into the farm long term. So obviously that will be part of our, let's say, the next step in our lives. Because obviously for the investment we make into the soil, which is not cheap, it will be good to see the long-term benefits of it. And we've already seen that from just being involved ever since of 2013 winter. And I mean, the other argument around lease versus improvements, that's also a good topic to discuss on another let's say, tasting of Tastinar. But this farm is special because we're neighbors to Arie Baardenhorst and to Jasper Wiekens that operates in this valley, which is called the Siebertskloof. Deep down in the valley, you'll see some white buildings. That's more or less where Jasper is based. And on the right-hand side, which you can't see now, is where Arie Baardenhorst is based. So it's an address, first of all, but it's a northern slope, it's a warm slope, beautiful pure granite, some shale. So we're happy to have a good foundation in terms of the platform. So Nadia joined permanently 2016, and I think ever since, let's say, the maturity around the vines we work with in the Swartland, the focus in terms of what we want to do. We'll get to that a bit later in terms of the Alpidios as an example, and also to Semillon after the single vineyards. We're part of the Swartland independent producers. So out of a making viewpoint, we try to work as natural as possible, but we don't consider ourselves as natural producers. Not that I have anything against it. I actually prefer and love some natural wines, but for me, I want to sleep at night, and for me, a clear, clean wine that's able to age without any potential risk is for me what we try to focus on. And then in terms of farming, we call it biological farming, which is basically an investment in dead soil. So historically, a lot of farms in the Swartland were farmed for mass production, and in theory, quite dead soils due to herbicides. So the investment to make our own compost, to mulch, to do no-till planting with cover crops, that's very important for us. And that's also where Nadia's detail come in terms of soil, because that's the big investment we make is focused on soil.
I think maybe just to give an overview, I hope you can see the arrow. So the owners of the farm has lots of horses on the farm, so we utilize their rests for the compost, which is the manure, to also we mix it with the grape rests, like the skins and the stems, etc., and make our own compost to work on the farm again. Then the top blocks are Pinotage, And then the majority of the farm is Chenin Blanc over here. And then the two semi-or blocks are surrounding the cellar. The cellar is now here where all the buildings are. So we can, we will show some more pictures regarding specific vineyards, but that's just to give an overview of how the Paarderbos farm looks and what varieties are planted there. And then the rest, we also, of course, make use of Syrah and Carignan, and some various other varieties, which we then source in from other properties, but all within the boundaries of the Swartland. There you can see our whole range that you are unable to taste right now, but should be able in not long from now. So our focus is Chenin and then Chenin-based blends. And then on the red side, Grenache and Grenache-based blends. And then also, of course, the Pinotage there at the end, which is also particularly from the Paarderbos farm.
Yeah, I think maybe to quickly just jump back, there won't be any Semillon from the 2019 vintage, which is excluded from this photo. We bottled the wine, just short of 2,000 bottles. But we're not happy with the quality in terms of at this moment with the wine, so we're not releasing it. So I think, it's also good to mention that because obviously we've got a good following on the Semillon. The Semillon is still included in the Aristarchus, so that's quite a key component, even if it's just less than 20%, between 10-15%, it will always play quite a relevant role in terms of the style of wine we make from the Semillon. And it's the only component we do some skin contact on, whereas the other whites are all just whole bunch pressed, although fermented with lees. So that's on the left, standing in the Skalikop vineyard. That's these are all neighboring farm people. Historically, we were just too small. We couldn't, let's say, empower local people. So we got contractors in, and we stopped that from 2016, and we supported only local people. So it's for us special to, let's say, keep the money in the mountain. And on the right-hand side, that's 4 or 5 of the guys that have been working with us for the last 4 years. So it's been a good team. And we're quite privileged to be able to have them around us, specifically because we don't own Paarderbos in terms of accommodation for anyone. So it's really important that you need to have people, because our business pretty much relies on people. On the right-hand side, it's Nadia in the Woerstian vineyard. Maybe she can quickly give you an overview of the red element in the soil.
It's probably the deepest soil, or the vineyard planted on the deepest soil that we work with. Typically in the Paardeberg, where the cellar also is in most of the vineyards, it's granite soils, more shallow sandy soils. But this is on the road towards Darling, so just west of Malmesbury, and it's a deep red Hutton soil, so it's a well-drained, slightly more textured soil, and also structured soil. So it's, the Woerstian we will get to a bit later, but that's just to give some perspective of how it looks beneath the vineyards. The one on the left is on Paarderbos specifically. So
it's quite a loose sand. You can see it looks like beach sand. It's a grayish, but it's weathered, decomposed granite, which is the fancy term. That's the core of most of our wines in terms of the main David Nadia project. And on the left, it's surprised to see some rain in the rain meter, so that's always good. And that's the thinnest I'll ever get, which is normally once a year in harvest time. Well, that's the thinnest we all get.
There's a weigh-in before on the first day of harvest.
Before and after.
Yes, exactly.
So I lose up to 5 kilograms, and next year I need to do up to 10.
You can borrow a training regime from your brother.
Do a bit of Zoom training.
Yeah.
On the right-hand side, on the right-hand side, it's not the most, it's the youngest photo. We've got a few more concrete tanks in, so it's predominantly on the red side, fermenting in bigger formats, and also a neutral vessel approach. We still do use some plastic food grade tanks, and the reason why is that we don't, let's say, have the money to just buy new stuff all the time. But it's also quite a functional vessel. It's because you use it for only a month. And then specifically for smaller lots that we mature in the 500 liter or 300 liters, it's convenient to have a smaller fermenter in which we can work for 1 month, kick them out, and then mature them in smaller oak.
And what's sort of your take on the sort of amphora? Have you got a direct line to Yogi? What's his name? Yogi De Beer, and what's the chap that does all the firing up of the clay pots? Have you got any of those in the cellar, and if you don't, is there a reason why, or where's the philosophy fit in with that?
So we matured a bit of Cinso in one of Yogi's pots, about a 200 liter pot last year that Donovan Roll borrowed to me. He's quite a nice guy, so he seems to just be borrowing some stuff out to other people. The reality is that our cellar is too small and at the moment not practical enough for any amphora. It's a beautiful vessel. It matures the wines. Yogi's clay amphoras are quite tightly baked. That's quite hot in terms of the temperatures that he fires it up. So the wines are kept fresh and actually it matures very slow. It's not a very porous and open vessel, which I think is good. I saw this morning Peter Allen that got, I think, a 500 or 800 liter amphora from Yogi, which is the biggest one he's ever made. So I'm definitely, all open for those type of, whether it's small or normal concrete eggs, amphoras, porcelain, and the likes. I think at the moment it's a practical aspect as well in terms of our cellar. We need to fill it up. If I had to turn this camera around, you would have actually seen the cellar on the other side, which is stacked up to the roof. So we need to utilize our space from floor up the way almost to the roof to make sure the investment is justified, and eventually so we can build a bigger cellar and hopefully have smaller formats and clay pots standing around.
Yeah, well, I didn't tell everyone, I forgot to, that obviously that we planned this Tastinar at 5 o'clock, which happened to be perfectly in the middle of the time slot of load shedding in the Swartland. So I actually don't know where you ended up. I forgot to ask you, but you've obviously made a plan.
Yeah, we got my brother, the building and the business we're sitting in is about 55 years old, and my grandfather started it and my brother took over from my dad, and they've got good backups because they're a chartered accountant firm that needs efficient backup. So yeah, thanks to Bosse Visser, we're quite privileged to be here.
Yeah, you have to do a shout out to the accounting firm.
Yeah, some hashtag marketing for Bosse Visser.
Yeah. No, cool.
Yeah, so if it's sad not to have these wines in front of you, but the Aristarchus remains the core, and I think, not to say the most important wine, because it's definitely not. I think the fact that we've got 2 children and we love them equally, it's basically so personal for us. But it's the 10th release of this wine, and it's for that argument where it all started back in 2010. At that stage, Nadia said that she doesn't want her name on the bottle, and that's why it was big and boldly just called David. And in a way, it was just not about me. It was also my grandfather on my mother's side, in terms of a tribute as well. But this wine will always be Chenin Blanc based. It will always be old vine project or old vines focused, which is Chenin and Semillon and Claret in terms of old vines. And it will always be granite based. So those, I think, 3 aspects remains the core of this wine. For the very first time after 2010, we've added Verdelho back, amazing acidity grape for this region. And since 2011, we've also added Grenache Blanc. And in 2020, we've got one big, small 300 liter barrel full of Colombar, which is an amazing grape in terms of acidity as well. So I think it's a beautiful part of the Aristarchus that even at 10,000 bottles, which is our biggest single bottling, this wine with core principles in terms of where it needs to be based on which, it's an exciting wine in terms of it's able to capture other younger vineyards that also belongs in warmer, call it Mediterranean regions, or grapes that have a beautiful history in our region, such as Columbar, which historically were used for distillation. We did a bit of skin contact on it because it's quite opulent when you don't restrain the wine a bit. But the acidity profile, I mean, we'll see at the end of the year if it's good enough, but the acidity component of Columbar is quite special in terms of long-term bottlings. So yeah, happy with 19. It's been a challenging vintage in terms of wind damaging the year before. We had some couleur or abortion of grapes due to a lot of wind in 2018 around end of October, beginning of November. This gives you an idea of the Aristarchus. We're based over here in the Paardeberg, specifically down here. And it's about 14 vineyards and up to 20 or 22 pickings. So it's obviously a lot of work that we create. I'm a good delegator, but it gives us a lot of components. And the reason why we prefer to work with components as opposed to just doing 7 picks from the varieties is that we also want to add acidity components if we need acidity for the vintage, or we want to add texture if we need it. So you have a spread risk in terms of that approach. It does eventually mean that we'll have up to 70 different wines or different pickings in the cellar. But quite frankly, that is what we do for a living. So we also need to make sure that we don't have to commercially correct and manipulate the vineyards or the wines coming in. We allow each and every picking, whether it's a single vineyard being picked 3 or 4 times, but we allow those components to speak for itself. And in a way, the Swartland got known for blends, both white and red. If you think of Saudi family, if you think of Badenhorst, Molyneux, and what inspired us actually at that stage was definitely the wines of Lammerzoek. Great winemaker at that stage was Albert Arends, and we're still good mates with him. So those wines are quite influential in terms of the reason why we actually made white and red blends our core focus. If you want to go.
Actually, maybe in Nadia, maybe even from a vineyard point of view, I'm interested looking at that map and how sort of spread out those sites are. So first question, that Shannon vineyard that's right in the top of the map, how far is that from the winery? How long does it take you to get there? Is it sort of...
That's about 30 kilometers from the winery. So it's not as far. And it's I think, one of the main decisions that we made at the beginning of our adventure is that we are going to stay true to Swartland. There's amazing vineyards in all other wine of origins areas. But just from a logistic perspective, let's try and keep everything together. So yeah, it looks it's not that 30 kilometers are close, but it's not as far. It's manageable. Yeah, it's
I think
probably. But I like that. I like this sort of the concept of, you're trying to put Swartland in a bottle, and it makes sense also logistically. So it sort of ticks all those boxes. And yes. I think that there was a slide in the beginning of all the grape varieties. I think it was also red and white, but just from a white point of view, and I might ask it again with the reds, out of all those grape varieties that you're putting in the current blend, which sort of historically since the beginning, which is sort of almost the most challenging grape to work with, and what's sort of the easiest one to work with, when maybe even from a vineyard and a winemaking point of view, which is easy and which is hard? I actually don't know.
I think easily it will be Roussanne, for the argument that we've lost Roussanne vineyards before in terms of long-term relationships. And if it's on, let's say, pure granite, which can be quite white in terms of sand or sun reflection, it can also burn quite easily. So I think the Roussanne is the biggest challenge in context of that. And both Roussanne and Marsanne, it's been only around in the Cape. I think Rustenburg made in 2003, 4, 5, 7, around there. They made the first Roussanne in the country. Having said that, Viognier is also quite relatively young. So I think Roussanne, the aromatic varieties in the Swartland, they weren't here from the beginning. And those components in a dry and warm vintage can be quite oily. So if you think of, let's say, Hermitage whites, they're not shy wines in many ways. And I think we adore and appreciate Roussins and Marsands with big and beautiful shoulders and good texture mid palates, but they also lose acid. So I think the components such as Chenin, the Verdelos, which can be quite aromatic, but the acidity focused in terms of a balanced blend is also quite important. And also in the cellar, I mean, to get enough Roussin and enough Marsanne is so difficult. We got a farmer to plant Marsanne and Roussin for us long term, so it's not an easy, out of that viewpoint, not an easy grape.
And then I assume Chenin's maybe the easiest to work with?
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's a difficult question in terms of, it's always about the right Chenin, about the right vineyard, and I think our region has got enough Chenin vineyards, even for 20 more winemakers to come in and make a living from this region. So that is the reality, is that we have so much vineyard still not being fully utilized.
Okay.
So it's an easy grape in terms of fermentation, in terms of pressing. We can work with it oxidatively. I think it's a versatile grape, which I sometimes hate to use the word, because I think it also created historically, due to the name, it created historically a semi-sweet vibe, and semi-sweet is fine if it's proper demi-sec or in a Spartlius style or in a specific natural style. But I think the problem with diversity and versatility is that it's also corrected semi-sweet in terms of adding, let's say, sugar back, and that gets to commercial. But anyway, quickly before we move to the next slide, is that we have a focused, let's say, granite approach in terms of this mountain and the foothills, and typically in the very much east, which is the Porceleinberg mountain over here, Kastelberg over there, those are very lateral, quite difficult soils to work with. Beautiful tension that we get from those wines, and there are schist or shale driven vineyards. Right in the right hand corner, that's the older Chenin Blanc vineyard we work with, 1962, planted in deep riverbed sand soil, so not an easy vineyard to farm in terms of too much almost well drained soils. In the west, which is Chenin Blanc over here, Marsanne, high clay contents, beautiful iron elements that typically comes from Darling. And over here, we've got, in my opinion, some of the warmest parts of the Swartland, which is halfway from Malmesbury towards Darling. It's flat, no elevation, but beautiful, deep gravel soils with a lot of iron influence. And this is a 1984 Chenin that we've been working with for 3 years. And the concentration and the texture, and call it volume, on that wine is quite amazing. So it's also a relative new addition, and it's also a long-term vineyard that we're working with, and maybe in the future it could be a fourth single vineyard Chenin Blanc bottling.
Okay, cool, good to know.
Yeah, so in terms of mulch, what we do is also slowly but surely aim to cover all our vineyards that we work with Kaufbahn.
With an organic material, or with a material such as any grains.
What's the English hay bales.
Yeah, any bales, any dry material.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the idea, and we've seen amazing results in terms of the soil analysis that we do on a regular basis. Just where the fruit pay off, it's not cheap to put these materials on the vineyards, but the results really pays off. Just in terms of preserving the moisture in the soil, the biological activity that increases. So yeah, this is just on a, if you look
and that's, would you see the results in a calendar year, or does it require a bit longer to see the results?
Yeah, I think you can almost feel the results if you're in the vineyards when you compare it to another block where we did not yet do it like this, in terms of just the moisture of the soil and the how healthy it looks just by looking at it. But in terms of results, we take soil analysis every 2 years. So a 2-year period is already enough to see significant results regarding that. And also when this picture was taken, we planted, like the cover crop is now the green parts, a mixture of only 2 species of cover crops. We are now doing cover crop planting with like a planter.
But no till planters, we don't work with the soil anymore. So it's not disturbing soil. Yeah. Because that's also important, and I think we're up to 8 or 9.
Yeah, it's 9 different species of cover crops that we now use, and just to because each and every cover crop has different characteristics or attributes that they can benefit the soil. So yeah, it's just an experiment. We learn every day to see in which block which species actually does better than the other. So yeah, it's definitely also, in terms of your question, it is a more long-term thing before you really see the results, and that you can make accurate assumptions or deductions on what you have done the past few years. But it's definitely a positive result that we get.
Just to be
thanks. And I was going to say that also answers a question that Johan on the chat popped through, which was on the cover crop. So thanks. And I'm intrigued to know what's in the left-hand pot there. Is that some green?
Just to add to the Schalikop, or to the photo that was taken in the Schalikop vineyard, 2019 vintage, we saw the result, at least quite a tangible, not even the yield wise, but quite a tangible result was the color of the leaves during vintage in comparison to other vineyards that weren't mulched.
Very interesting.
So 2016 we started with the Schalikop, that's the very first vineyard, compost, mulch, removing weeds with our hands, and just during the vintage of 19 there was much greener leaves as opposed to other vineyards that were actually more struggling.
Well, just to keep the gears going, you don't have to comment, but we've got lots of wine being drunk behind the scenes here. So Dave King drinking some 15 Aristagos, Ina some 2012. I think there's some, sure. Anna Booker's drinking some 12. So everyone's supporting the cause.
Yeah, sure. But
carry on.
Maybe on that note, we should take you up with a proper vertical tasting that we can do from 2010, 11 up, like a 10, 12 year vertical tasting when we are allowed to do so.
This is all recorded, by the way, so you can't.
Keep it to that.
We're looking for an excuse to get out of the Swartland. So on the left, it's Semio without stems. We also do one with stems. It depends on the vintage. And it will be on the skins for about a week. And that's the beautiful part of having these concrete tanks. Before, they were done in these blue covered white plastic grade tanks, which is the easy part of it, because it's also a mobile tank. So we take them out, the crush pad is outside of the cellar. We don't have enough space to fit a press in the cellar. But yeah, so it's a functional vessel, 1 week on the skins and then pressed off, and finishes fermentation in stainless steel. So that's the only wine that we do like that.
White wine.
By the way, you've opened a can of worms with your vertical.
We'll do one in Cape Town as well. So
you're officially committed. Colleen and Renzo and a whole bunch they're all in. So you know.
We'll be happy. We'll be happy to do that.
Sorry, carry on.
No, that's just an average view in the middle of the Paardeberg. So it's between the Aprilskloof, which is where Babylon's Peak, Saudi family, Lammershoek are based. And if you drive over the ridge towards the Siebertskloof, obviously Sunrise, and also Morelig on the left, which is a farm that we support, and we also work and get some Claret Blanche and Carignan from here. So Chenin Blanc 2019 vintage, 7 vineyards, all part of the Old Vine project. So they're all registered single vineyards, planted from 1962, and then a youngest edition being the 84 planted vineyard that I spoke about towards the west. And it's, I think, ever since 2017, we started focusing in terms of the Chenin as being part of the Old Vine project. And we actually tasted with Rosa Krier yesterday and with Nadia from the Old Vine project. And it was special to be able to share the story with them, but also to hear back from their side, the traction and also, in a way, the culture that shifted in our country in terms of the Old Vine project, and culture being how well you look after vineyards in terms of hygiene, whether you want to keep it in the soil longer term as opposed to just replace them every 20 or 25 years. So hats off to the Old Vine project, and for which we are proud members of.
Yeah, I must say, just in reading odd articles that come across the desk or on social media, it does feel like they've really nailed it in terms of what they've put together with that whole project. And I mean, everyone's just, I mean, there's an obvious part about it is old vines that are healthy are exciting to make great wine. It seems like they've really, the whole really worked out, which is cool. And you're obviously part of it. And the benefit is to end up putting a proper wine in the bottle because you've got amazing materials. So.
Yeah, I think also important to mention the Chenin Blanc Association and also WineTech in terms of the involvement with the Old Vine project. And I think it's mutual in terms of the amount of research specifically towards Chenin. We also became proud members of the Chenin Blanc Association this year for the first time. And to see the amount of work done behind the screens, I think it's a hats-off approach. And for us, it's quite special to be involved with these projects that actually dovetail and work together, and the amount of research. I mean, we were privileged to have some of the viticulturists from Antwerp in France came out to the Swartland to look at Chenin and specifically old vines from the Cape. And the foundings, in terms of the clones we have in our country, some virus-free material they've seen from certain vineyards up in Skirfberg, which is quite exciting, and hopefully some research will be done in terms of why Chenin Blanc or some old vines would see a virus, whether it's a mutation internally that they're actually virus-free because they were planted next to virus-infected vineyards. So some interesting historical, groundbreaking work being done by those guys. So that's Woerstein, 1968 planted. The name refers to the fact that those are quite tall and high bush vines. So if you look at that picture, it tells the story. It's a southern-faced little terraced vineyard, 2 hectares in size.
Huh? It's amazing.
Up to 4,000 vines over 2 hectares, which means that we need to interplant at some stage. And we've done our 7th vintage this year from this vineyard. And we were only privileged enough to work our own compost and cover crop, no-till planted and mulched in this vineyard 7-8 years down the line. So hopefully what will follow will be a Massal selection. This vineyard in itself is already a Massal selection. We have some Crucian Blanc, which is the Cape Riesling, some Palomino, and 1 False Pedro vine in between. It's not a field blend. It's, in our opinion, about 95% plus Chenin Blanc. So we don't see it as a field blend. We see it as beautiful historical information in terms of the fact that it's a selected Massal basis. Those vines that were mistakenly grafted and cut from a previous vineyard. So it tells a beautiful part of our history in our country.
So quick one, I listened to Tim Atkin interview Rosa Kruger the other day, and he asked the question, he said to her, how many of these old vineyards does she think are still left that are undiscovered, that people haven't come across? Because it's obviously been topical and very much part of the journey for a lot of winemakers. And I like the question because she said, no, there's still vineyards out there that people haven't found. And the reason why I bring that up is, so how did, like this vineyard, how did you find out about it? Were you the first one on the scene? How did that work? Because I mean, I think that's a big part of it, is how you get access to the vineyard.
I think a lot of it in the Swartland, I mean, I'm in a privileged situation to have with my grandfather.
It's who you know.
Just who you know.
I was about to say, it's who's got the fastest bakkie to get there.
Yeah. So a lot of these vineyards and the newly planted Grenache vineyard came to life with the same principle, that the family owning it now, their grandfathers were clients of my grandfather. And with this context, this farm owner, he bought the farm, so it's his first generation, but he's one of my dad's good mates and also one of their clients. So I've been buying Cinto from him actually before this. I was in the same vehicle as him when we drove past this vineyard, and he said that it's basically being sold to another winery, not in the Swartland. And the very first vintage, almost at night, we went with his permission to take 1 or 2 tons from it.
Yeah, what's left?
And eventually we had this good discussion with the other seller, because they were also sourcing 20, 30 vineyards across the Cape, and they didn't have any sentimental value for this specific, well, for only this vineyard. And as of 17, they actually said that we can take it completely. So with good blessing, and I think it's important in a very small industry is to keep that part of it. The bridge should never be burned. But we were like smugglers at night, and we wish we could all smuggle some wine to Johannesburg at the moment, but we were picking before they came in, and just a ton or two. So the question of Rosa is fascinating, because we spoke about it yesterday as well. The amount of vineyards that will sadly be lost due to marginal, let's say, business models or sellers that can't afford the price for these vineyards at the moment, with the oversupply of wine, both locally and internationally. I think it's a big challenge for these vineyards. It obviously, we've got about, I think, 3,200 hectares in our country at the moment certified, which is growing every year. But there's not nearly enough buyers in terms of grapes. So if anyone around the world wants to support South Africa, I think buy a big voucher towards the Chenin Blanc project, towards Old Vine project. I saw Tim also posted that he bought 1 olive tree somewhere in Sicily, and so he adopted an olive tree. So I think we also need to start adopting vines across the world in South Africa.
Yeah, no, cool story.
Scarlet 1985 planted. So as of 2020, it will also be an additional wine to the Old Vine project in terms of certification. Lateral soils, some of the shallowest soils we work with, which is quite the contradiction to the Worstian, which is quite deep, richer soil types. So typically the wines are, let's say, slightly broader shoulders, a bit richer in style. Not that my shoulders are very big, but the Scarlet just seems to amaze us in terms of the fact that it's an anomaly in the Swartland, and it's an anomaly in the Paardeberg in terms of this photo shows that Platbos on the right is showing pure granite, and on the left is a little hill neighboring with the neighboring farm, obviously, that shows a bit of historical shale that pushed through the granite. There's also a little copy behind that shows some like coffee clip, which is iron deposits. So it's quite a mixed little hill, but yeah, more tension in terms of the mid palate, like a lateral tension in terms of this wine. And yeah, we also started with both the Scarlet and Worstian as of 2014 in terms of single vineyard bottlings. And all of the single vineyards we produce and release, they do form and they do create a backbone for the Aristarchus and the Chenin. That's very important for us to mention, and also to be honest about the Chenin and Aristarchus needs to be a representative wine of the Swartland, but it also needs to be the best Chenin and Aristarchus in what we can make from the Swartland. So we will never diminish and deplete the project just for the sake of bottling a barrel or 2 more of the Scarlet or Platbos or Worstian. So quickly on the Platbos, 1981 planted. Historically, we were only destining this wine for Chenin and for Aristarchus. I never really thought of it bottling it separately. And I think it's our neighbor, Adi Baardnost, with his 15 or 20 different Chenin single vineyards from the one mountain, which amazed us in terms of linearity, texture, salinity, acidity profiles, that actually inspired the idea to bottle 2 barrels separately or 3 barrels back in 18, which we released last year. This vintage is up to 2,000 bottles, which we're happy with. It's a 4-hectare vineyard. We started mulching it, composting it last year as well. So that's the new extension in terms of at least all 3 single vineyards are now being mulched, composted, and no-till planted. And this will be, the same philosophy applies with the other Grenache single vineyards for the future. Is to have a platform of biological farming, which obviously comes at a price. It's expensive, so we can't afford it on all the different projects and wines.
Yeah, well, on that exact comment, I'm not sure who Shannon 20 is, but they asked if you had any idea of what the average cost was per year to maintain one of these old vineyards. It might be quite a tough question, but is that possible to answer or not really?
In terms of the mulching or just average farming of old vines?
Yeah, probably average farming would make sense. I mean, is that something you calculate or not really?
Yeah, it's an easy answer, I think, and it can range from as cheap as possible up to as expensive as possible, because it's a relative term and relative thing. But we've done calculations and we got down, and it's obviously, if you work on it per hectare, you can easily quantify it at from 30 up to 80,000 rand a hectare if you want. Purely the investment of mulch, the material is 20,000 rand, the labor to get it out, the compost, the no-till planting. So I think we're at between 40 to 50,000 rand a hectare. So when we do get 2 tons a hectare, we celebrate. We do cry when it's 0.9 tons a hectare, which is what we've also had before. And it can go beyond that. The most expensive grapes we buy is 50,000 rand per hectare, and we get about between 1.5 to 2 tons from it. So I think the cost obviously goes up as we start mulching it and investing it. Luckily, when you look at mulch, you don't have to do that every year. So it's like every 3-4 year program, topping it up, so your costs do go down. And obviously the amount of detail you put in, it varies, but it's quite an expensive exercise.
No, but I think it's an important point, because to maybe someone that's not listening to this, or you pick a bottle off a shelf and you look at a bottle and you see a price, whatever that price may be, let's say it is a more premium priced wine, you sometimes wouldn't be aware of all the stuff that goes in behind the scenes with old vines, with low yields and all of these things. So it does, I think it gives a nice bit of perspective. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think time is against us, but it's interesting discussion if you look at price points, because I'm able to buy Shannon at 5,000 rand a ton in a Swartland if I want to get hold of some Shannon at that price point. And if the farmer makes a margin, if he's happy, then it's a sustainable model. But the reality of, let's say, 4,000 rand is that across the mountain in a good friend of mine's region, which is called the Bredekloof, they're able to yield 30 tons a hectare and also fetch 4,000 rand a ton. So you need to also think of business. And we've seen citrus farmer ripping up, and if they've got water rights, they would rip up vineyards because they can't subsidize it anymore. Skirtberg, they luckily are in a situation where they make great profits from citrus, where they are able to subsidize a hectare or 5 of old vines. But if they needed that land for citrus to make ends meet, then they will take it out. So the sentimental values, unfortunately, for a lot of farmers are out of the window. They need to have sustainable, well-profit, good margin type of business models running. And you need to make wine and you need to bottle it, for that argument, at least in a dry region.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm talking too much. Okay,
we've got 10 or 15 minutes, so we've got to get to the reds, and then I'll try and handle a couple more questions coming through. But carry on.
Perfect. So 2 vineyards, which was the same as the previous 2 years. 2020, we'll see 5, at least 4 or 5 vineyards, depends on the quality. So we planted, ever since of 2016, we've planted more Grenache in the Swartland. At the moment, it's 75% based on the Paardeberg, which is these hills over here from early 2000 planted Grenache. And although we're able to get some Picanierskloof old vine Grenache, we also decided, like we said earlier on, to focus 100% on the Swartland, even if it means to work with younger vineyards. For us, the region is important, but also to plan for the future. This is a newly established 2017 vineyard that yielded a bit of fruit this vintage. Caught us off guard, typically as Grenache do, because it yielded a bit too much and my salary is too small. But it's a northeast faced 450 meter altitude focused vineyard in the Swartland, in the Paardeberg especially, which is If you think of the northern part of it in terms of Pakketberg, you get up to 600 meters, 800 meters. Paardeberg, I think the maximum planted will be around 550, maybe max. So these are some of the highest altitude focused vineyards. And hopefully within the next year or two, we'll be able to start with a mulching, compost planting, of cover crop planting program on this. And in the future, this vineyard is destined for one of our single vineyards. So yeah, it's also special. It's young, a lot of farming, a lot of decisions. We did proper Blanc de Noir pickings on this vineyard. We did a decent green vintage, green harvest to avoid dilution. But this is an established 2016 vineyard. This project goes up almost another hectare above this photo, and a lot of it also needs to be still planted out. This is a shale-rich vineyard on the Kasteelberg, which faces east, northeast, and north. Slightly raised bush vines, and obviously with other activities on the farm in terms of table grapes. The birds love these Grenache vines, so we also have during vintage some nets on. So again, that's part of the future in terms of single vineyard material, and we've also done good picking from this vintage, from this vineyard, this vintage.
And that's spacing between those two sort of rows of vines with all the sort of fynbos there. Is that looks like quite a big space. What's is that just from an erosion point of view, or to what? How does the planting density work? How do you go about that?
Historically, in our region, people plant according to tractor width. So if you move towards Darling, where you don't have a lot of hills, they've got wide tractors for big wheat farming activities. So they plant 3-4 meter rows, which is what they do. So these vineyards and these terraces were created back in 1980. And this is also a family, it's a business connection. One of my grandfather's clients historically, and also current owners being clients. So it's effectively around a tractor, but regardless of it, it's about the terrace itself. You couldn't fit the third row in it. If you adapted or a different type of tractor, or if you only do spraying with the backpacks, you are able. But it's not a compromise. It's also meeting one way in the middle in terms of this is what the farmer actually also proposed, and we agreed happily. The result is that we also need to pay much more attention to the outside row in terms of drying out due to the fynbos. So the outside rows are all properly mulched this year. So yeah, we learn as we go on. I mean, it's not that we paid someone a lot of money to redesign this vineyard. Basically, Nadia did the profiling, the studies, and the soil depth and analysis. And based on that, we plant and we work with it and also expand for the future. That's close to midnight. It's just chaos. It's presses being cleaned. Meat is ready. Everyone is hungry. We've had a braai. Multiple evenings looked like this. So yeah, sorting on the right hand side, and this is a little photo that indicates just how we call it manipulate gravity. We don't pump our red wines or red grapes. It's all either whole bunch and sorted or destemmed, not crushed, then sorted. And then we've got two little skips that we just lift up with a forklift, and we just gravitate it into these tanks, and it spends up to 4 weeks, sometimes 5 weeks in the skins. Elpidios, as with the Grenache, both for the very first time do have a cement or concrete matured component in them. Elpidios 18 is also the very second vintage where this wine is actually Grenache led. Even if it's just by 2%, historically it came from 10%, sometimes 15% of Grenache that we were able to include. So it's come a long way in terms of making it Grenache led. And I mean, we're quite happy with the 19 that we've also bottled in November or December last year. Again, Grenache led. And this is the future in terms of what we see all our red wines, at least the blends, will be based on. There's another beautiful map in terms of the Carignan, the Grenache, Syrah, Pinotage, more Pinotage from the Paardeberg, granite focused. Also 1984, same property. Again, historical family connections. In the north, some Grenache and Syrah on an organically certified farm. For those of you that knows the wines of Nativo, Billy Hughes is an Argentinian engineer. He farms organic and with biodynamic principles, so we saw some fruit from him. So yeah, some sense.
The Elpidius, sorry to interrupt. It's always a year older than your other reds. Is that? I mean, it's gone through a mini evolution in the last few years from a grape composition point of view. And for what it's worth, this is actually the one that I'm drinking. And I know we spoke before we got onto the Zoom, but like this for me, for my taste, is my favorite of the Elpidiuses that you've made, that the two of you have made. I love this, and maybe it's the Grenache, the extra Grenache, or vineyards kicking in, but this is amazing. And is that, so yeah, just from an aging point of view, is that something that's going to change, or is it going to stay the same? It's always going to be a year older than the other reds, or what's the plan?
I think historically, as we grew up in terms of wine terms, looking back at the Swartland, our region still today is known for Syrah. So the initial influence on that, and also working for Sarensberg, so a lot of Syrah exposure, worked the vintage in the Northern Rhone, Syrah exposure, and we assumed it needs to be Syrah based. And with the droughts, and also pretty much from 2011 with our very first Grenache bottling separately, we realized eventually that Grenache is our love in terms of a grape that's suited to the region in terms of its droughts and harsh conditions. And it took us a couple of years before we got to that extent, before we could make it a Grenache based blend. And I grew up in wine terms where red wines were always more expensive than whites, and they always had to be older than whites. So we've line priced these wines, and this is the, let's say, the rhythm in terms of the Elpidios historically were always released a year later. Therefore matured 2 years in oak, and we've changed that rhythm. We also, as of 16, we bottle after a year, as the same with the other wines, but we release a year and a half later in bottle. So that's a little change from 15 to 16, and then in 17 Grenache, in 18 a bit of Syrah in terms of the concrete maturation component. So I think more or less where we are, we're quite happy for this approach. And if I look at 2019 already been bottled, we've bottled some magnums of the 19 vintage Elpidios as well. So yeah, previous vintage of photo was Carignan. That's a mix of loose weathered sand, a lot of iron deposits. That's Carignan towards Darling. This is Syrah in the very much western valley in the Paardeberg. The last wine, before we get to the sweet wine. No.
Surprise.
Surprise. There should be a bell ringing on each and everyone's door now to deliver the sweet wine.
Everyone's going to start logging out. And
So 90s planted on Paardeberg, less whole bunches than with the other two wines. It's a tighter tannin in terms of a drier tannin. It's a bit more angular tannin from Pinotage. It's got a beautiful inheritant quality, which is a challenge from Cinsault in terms of higher pHs. So even if I pick an almost Christmas Day, I would still get high pHs, relatively speaking. But this is an amazing variety that ever since of 2013 going on to 14 started participating or started contributing to Elpidios. It will never be a Cape blend in terms of 30% as a base. It will always contribute purely for the argument that we view Pinotage as a blend of Cinsault and Pinot Noir. So we make it accordingly. The tannin is just a bit more rustic in terms of those two varieties, but it plays a beautiful part in terms of the Elpidios, and it's a beautiful bottling to do separately. And I think it ages well.
It's funny that we had that discussion, when was it, last week, about that exact thing about Pinotage, because we all know that it gets bashed around in circles for a variety of reasons. But I think that exactly what you said there, if you think about the parents of that grape variety, I think it's important to actually put something in the bottle that reflects that, and your style is very much more that elegant, lighter, delicate. It's not something rich and heavy, which maybe is not necessarily a bad thing if you can do it properly. But I think it really pays homage to the parents of the grape in terms of the way that the two of you make it. I prefer that style, but that's also a personal thing. And it's not to say that a heavy, rich, big style doesn't have its place. I think it's certainly what gets put in the bottle I enjoy a lot.
Yeah, I think it's quite a relevant grape, obviously in our country, for the fact that it's been locally crossed, but the professor that crossed it plays also quite a relevant role in terms of Professor Perrault, in terms of Grenache, in terms of our country historically. So it's also historically not for just Pinotage, he's relevant in our country. I mean, he's in 1903 confirmed that what was planted historically in our country in terms of Grenache, and the Spanish Garnacha that he imported, and then Grenache that from Montpellier confirmed were indeed the same grape. So he's like a legend in our industry, and for that argument we salute him. And also relevant, like Professor Archer and Orfer, that all played so much of a relevant role towards Chenin as well. So yeah, I think that's about it. I think I need about 5 hours more if I had my way.
No, well, yeah, I like the way you sort of, we caught up at the end there. So well done. I think that was an answer on the mouse there.
It's probably the 20 phone calls I got from someone to tell me that I need to hurry up.
But just a couple, I mean, as I say, a couple of minutes before we maybe sign off. But I always like sort of putting it a question in the court regarding, I don't know, other wines from whether it's in South Africa or around the world that from a red and white point of view, what are some of the wines, not vintage, more maybe style in the States, what are some of the wines that have inspired you over the years to, I don't know, drink wine, make wine, continue to be driven? Are there particular areas on the planet that have always sort of got the hairs on your arm standing up?
Yeah, it's again a 1 hour question or answer. Quickly, if you think of Chateau Rayas, not for how famous they are, but for the fact that in the Chateauneuf context, the diurnal shift in terms of the type of soil they have, and also in northern slopes in terms of not traditionally northern hemisphere, southern slopes being the warmer slopes. So the diurnal shift shows in the wines in terms of, although they're not shy, they do show more elegance in terms of reds, and also the tasting we've had recently with Louis Baroul from Saint Côme, there's also a cooler element to it. And so if you think of that as inspiration all the way down to our producers in the Roussillon, Olivier Pithon and Pardy, and then in Priorat and Monsant, some great producers in the Sierra de Gredos. I mean, the Commander G, it's a well-known project from Jimenez Landi. Those wines are more altitude focused, but inspirational wines. There's another group called Quattro Monos, and quite ethereal, almost Trousseau-like Grenache, which is initially so pale and almost restrained that it takes time to open up. So it's a bit of everything, and also acknowledging the Mediterranean aspect of where we're situated, and also in terms of the Swartland, and also in terms of inspirational wines. Chenin, hopefully Greater Mainz will import and will hopefully land it from Thibon Boudenois. But I mean, from Thierry Germain in Savennier, in Domaine Huet, which is, I think, quite classical in terms of Vouvray. I think the acidity profile of those wines remains a big inspiration. Having said that, we much warmer than that in terms of conditions, but also limestones. So again, going back to let's say Mediterranean white blends. If I take the Chateauneuf, or at least the Northern Rhone white blends, sometimes they're too rich and powerful. So I prefer more acidity-driven whites in terms of blends. So we draw attention, or not attention, we draw inspiration from a lot of producers where we've been, or where we still need to be, and hopefully we can earn a bit more money so we can buy more of those wines and get more inspired. So yeah.
No, that's cool. That's good to hear. Someone asked, "What's in your glass?" We didn't know what you were drinking. Are you drinking some Tassenberg, or what's there? What do you got?
Oh, Tassenberg. We actually brought the full lineup. We thought we were going to taste all of them with you. So we've got 8 wines by ourselves. The kids are looked after. So we're going to sit and
get stuck in.
Yeah.
So all the current vintage that you're tasting through.
Yeah, I tasted them yesterday morning, and we had them open, so we brought them along. Just we were just worried that you might caught us out. We're not having our own wines in our own glasses. But no, obviously, we try to not drink our own wine all day. It's important to drink other people's wine. So we'll definitely open something up when we get back home if the power is on.
Yeah, nice. I've got the same concern going home now, whether the lights are going to be on. Anyway, but I'm just obviously aware of the time, and we've probably learned from the few that we've done just to keep it relatively timeless in terms of keeping to a schedule, and we've managed to get through everything. I know it's a bit of a condensed sort of hour and a bit, but I think it's massively valuable for all the people that follow and love your wines. And we thank everyone that has joined us, and for the questions, and for everyone that's been pulling the corks, which we can see. And I know we had some international guests today, so there were some importers, I think, so for the first time. So welcome to all of those people that kindly joined us. And that's basically it from my side, and I really appreciate you guys making the time tonight. And I look forward to the next version, which will be with more liquid in the glass and more personal contact, I suppose. But no, thanks for your time, and we really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you on Swartland soil soon, or if you're up in Johannesburg.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks for the Great Domains team, and obviously for each and everyone that took out the time and tuned in. We're humbled, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for being part of our journey locally, internationally. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and parting shot for those that haven't bought any wine, it's the time is now, and get stuck in. The wines are amazing. So we never normally do a sales thing. That wasn't meant to be. But anyway, the wines are available. Get stuck in. Thanks for your time, guys, and have an awesome evening. We'll chat soon, okay?
Thanks, you too. Thank you,
Thanks, Derek. Thanks, guys.
Ciao.